is any audio source or whatever. So I like unplugged it, and then when I opened OBS, that seemed to like kick it into gear. So then it started
Hmm.
recognizing my mic.
Uh-oh.
What?
I know. I got a 2-second spinning circle of death on Twitch. Just refreshing because now I'm super behind on Twitch, even though it was literally 2 seconds. All right, testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
I was somehow muted on Twitch. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Oh shit! All my windows just fucking went down. Jesus Christ! What the fuck? That was weird.
Ah.
I don't know. I was just like moving the pop out chat, and it like took the Discord, the Google Chrome, and all of it, and like minimized them. All right. Hello and welcome to episode 230 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the first minor of the 2026 Call of Duty League season, the first of two minors this year for the CDL. We're going to break it down, give our predictions for the winners and everything. We also have a little bit else to talk about. Not too much. This has been a relatively slow week in the world of Call of Duty esports, but we do have some potential GAs on the horizon, which probably is like an evergreen topic for this podcast. And we also have a top 10 list that I think we can give our opinion and break down and, maybe give our critiques too. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, thinking this is probably going to be one of our shorter shows, which means in typical Ego Chow fashion, it'll probably end up being a 2-hour banger somehow. But yeah, that's how it goes. Don't have a ton to talk about, so might as well jump right in.
Let's start with the GA discussion. The Ghost of Hope tweeted a few days ago now on Monday that he said, quote, word on the street from what I'm hearing is that CDL pros are going to be scrimming the NPC this week with no damage range barrel / trying out the prestige attachment barrel that lowers damage to see how it plays out. Obviously, the NPC came into the CDL, made its introduction essentially in the first week of the Major 3 qualifiers. It was a very good gun. That was pretty much its reputation going in. That seems to be its reputation coming out of the first week and going into this minor. How do you feel about GAs or different attachments being used on this gun just a week or 2 weeks in to it making its introduction into the CDL?
I mean, go back and watch the tape from last episode if you didn't, because I don't know exactly how I phrased it, but I definitely at least mentioned that this was a possibility. If I didn't say that, this was for sure happening, obviously, because I didn't know, but um, just based on how everyone was talking about the gun and seemingly how effective it was, and in the small sample size, I knew this was most likely a very strong possibility. And I mean, I don't blame them. There's obviously um I think that there were some instances just last week alone where it was like these guys who earlier in the season might not have had the best performances were clearly playing a little bit better. And if they were if in the minds of any of the pros, it's like, oh, this guy sucked a couple months ago and now he's turning up with this gun, like, that could be a factor. But regardless of actual statistical, performances and whatnot, it felt like the gun was very strong. And like I said, there I could last show I remember saying there were at least a couple instances where like people were getting three pieces without even having to reload the gun. And it was like, you know it's not surprising to me. Like, I'm honestly wouldn't have been surprised if they somehow GA'd the gun entirely and
Hmm.
found a different sub to use. But I mean that's an entire other issue because I don't think there's any other sub right now that's like you know not GA'd or not willing to be tested or whatever the situation is. I definitely am out of touch on the meta stuff just because I haven't been playing the game myself. But I feel like um this is the least surprising development, just given what we saw last week from the NPC.
I know that there was discussion that the Kogot could be, when we were in
Yeah.
between Major 2 and the Major 3 qualifiers, it seemed that there was, like literally 12 hours, 18 hours of time where the Kogot actually could have made its way into the CDL. Obviously, that didn't happen. The NPC took precedence. I do wonder if that conversation could be brought back if if we're talking about putting different attachments or GAing specific attachments related to the NPC, would it not just be easier to go to another gun and say, hey, we don't need to actually do any of this GA stuff. We don't need to worry about the attachments nearly as much because it's a lesser gun. It's not as good as the NPC. And I also wonder, you've talked about it, especially that the NPC is very good close range. It's obviously going to melt anybody close range, but that's also the point of an SMG. And I feel like we just haven't had that very much recently with the guns that are actually used in the CDL, which I think makes the AR players kind of uncomfortable because they haven't had to deal with it, so they don't really know how to react. And I think that does lead to some of these discussions about GAs or attachments. Just like if this was 5-10 years ago, I don't think the conversation is nearly as prevalent as it is now. But I think ARs are just in a different place where they're not accustomed to what's going on now. And I think that could also lead to probably some unfair changes. I don't really know why, if you're an SMG player, you would vote in favor of this. Like if you would agree to something like this, because of course I want the better gun. And like, I don't care whether ARs or the flex players have a tougher time with this, but like that to me would be like one of the conversations to have. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, like the potential of like ARs potentially pushing for these changes just out of like sheer like kind of trying to make sure that they're going to be okay after this.
I don't know. I feel like that's been you know a narrative around GAs as a whole for years, is whether it's maps, guns, etc. Like it's never been. Well, I can't say that. It's from the outside looking in. It has felt like at times that some GA decisions are made not with the best intention for the game as a whole, but for individual team and individual players, what they think is best for themselves and their team. Um, so obviously, like some AR players might think the SMG is too good and want to make changes to it to help them, and on the inverse, some SMG players might think that the AR is too good at given times. That's happened multiple times over the years. So I don't know how much of that is this situation in particular, because at least in this game, like the M15 is still like basically a do it all gun. So it does. I don't like. It's weird for me to talk about just because I don't have my own like opinion from playing the game and using
Mm-hmm.
the weapons myself, but if the M15 in theory at least is as good as it seemingly is, to the point where we've seen earlier this year 8 M15s on the map at once, then having an SMG that is almost as good as having an SMG that is like super strong as an SMG while having an AR that's super strong as an AR seems to be like, maybe a little bit of a balance. The
Mm-hmm.
issue in other times is when, like, the Dravik is mapping people, or in other games where an AR is like the M4 in MW 2019, people started using that with like SMG attachments, like no
Yeah.
stock, no red dot, and they were like hip firing people from 2 feet away. And I think that's when the bigger issue for attachment GAs and stuff have to come into play. Obviously, the sniper is just a totally different situation, but yeah, I think I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with these GAs and if it actually makes any like meaningful difference. But I mean, I guess on one hand, you can look at this as like at least they're testing stuff mid-season, where there have been other opportunities where we've talked about like they don't even want, seemingly the pros don't even want to try maps, don't want to try new guns after DLC is added, etc.
Yeah, I think it's, I have like this conflicted feeling about what they're doing right now, because I appreciate that they were kind of forced into the position where they couldn't use the Javik anymore, so they had to shift and they had to pick another SMG. But at the same time, now that they're trying to GA or just kind of change how the gun is used in the CDL, it does make me think like they only do these things out of survival, not necessarily for the betterment of the actual competitive integrity. Because like, will we actually get, to your point, when we did have 8 M15s on the map? Obviously, that wasn't like every map, it wasn't the whole map or whatever, but there were specific instances in which both teams were like, yeah, it's actually better if we just have all these ARs. Will we get to that point in the CDL where there are 8 NPCs? I don't necessarily know if that's the case. I feel like that's something that almost could be like, yeah, like that's what we're going to do, but I just don't see that happening. Like, if you need a long range kill, then why would you use the NPC? Why would you kind of put yourself at that disadvantage? Maybe, different players will have to be more flexible and they'll have to sometimes pull out the NPC, and even though they're like a primarily M15 player, but like that's just the nature of Call of Duty. That's kind of what it's always been about, is that there isn't like, we don't have like hard and fast roles in the sense that if you run an M15, you can only run an M15, that you can never run an SMG.
And that's honestly been one of the biggest evolutions of the quote unquote roles in Call of Duty esports as a whole. And people like Zuma and even Nadeshot to an extent have talked about that in recent years, where it's like, back in the day, you even had your OBJ player. The guy who he was always going to sit in your hill, grab the flag in CTF, grab the bomb in S&D, etc. And in many years ago, that basically became extinct to the point where it's just like, yeah, you got to be able to get kills and do the OBJ. And now we're at this point where everyone shoots super, wow, everyone shoots super straight with every gun, and you just have to be able to use multiple guns in multiple situations, and you got to be able to do some of the objective work in some situations. Some people obviously do more than others, but still, that's like the days of like, okay, you got to have 2 ARs, 2 SMGs, no matter what. Those are kind of if it's not totally gone right now, it's seemingly on its way out as an ideology. And the teams that have the players who are able to adapt the most, whether it's from game to game or in a mid-game cycle like we're seeing now with these changes in the middle of Black Ops 7, those are the teams that seemingly historically in recent years have seen a little bit more success, in my opinion.
I'm like, if they want to go back to a system in which like OBJ players are SMG players, which is not really the case anymore. Like, a lot of AR players will get the majority of the hill time because that's just how it goes. Like, you might see Dashy, he could have like 2 minutes in the hill during a game because that's what his team called for in that moment. But if they want to go back to a system in which the OBJ player is the SMG player, and then you have like an SMG Slayer, and then you have, kind of a flex like anchor support, and then you have an anchor, then like an AR, like a primary AR player, then I'm fine with that. But you also, if you want that system, you're going to have to actually make it required, because nobody is going to just give it up. Nobody is going to be okay with, just kind of giving up an advantage to the other team. And that's where I think some of these GA arguments are just like they lose me because I just see through what they really want. And that's like they want it to be as easy as possible. They want it to be as competitively advantageous for them as possible. And that doesn't necessarily make a better product. It doesn't make a more entertaining product. It doesn't give you a very diverse product, as we've seen that like we could go through an entire season where 2 or 3 guns are really only used that entire year. Like that's not good for just competitive in general. So I would like to see more guns. I would like to see more diversity, in the choices that these teams make, which I think was always kind of a fun part about like champs back in the day was that Killerfish, which was a German team, played completely different than an English team, and the Australian teams played completely different than the South African teams and the South American teams. And I felt like that was kind of a great thing to see when you got to these international events. And we just don't have that obviously anymore because we have 12 teams who are all like very insulated. They play each other, they scrim each other, they know exactly what to expect when they play each other, and it just leads to, I guess, like a real down, like a downer kind of environment. And I again, this is kind of like we're off topic a little bit, but I do think it's interesting that we literally have the first change that we've seen in this meta all year round, other than like whatever that 2-week period where I don't even remember what the gun is, but it was very, very early in the Major 1 qualifiers, and we had like a week or two where there was a third gun that made its way into the CDL. But now that we actually have a change, the pros are like, yeah, this change is too much. It's too radical for what we want, and we would like it to be. Basically, they want it to be Dravik 2.0. They want it to be the exact same gun so they don't have to change very much. And I think that's where they're always going to lose me. I just don't buy that it is just because it's too good. It's just like it's too good for what they want to play like. It's not necessarily that it's too strong. It's just that it's different than what they've had to deal with for like the last 5-6 months. And I just think that's a bad way to kind of go about it, a bad way to approach the CDL in general. I don't think you have anything else on this topic, right? Unless we could move on and talk about Nameless's top 10 list, which got a little bit of buzz. I don't know how much I disagree with him. I definitely disagree on some points, but he unveiled his top 10 list and 3 honorable mention players. So I think the honorable mentions are more interesting than the top 10 in some way, but the 3 honorable mention players for his list was Hook, Hydra, and Kips. So obviously Kips jumps out really for me just because he's a rookie. He's only been in the CDL for maybe 2 months now. Toronto had really been up and down until Major 2 when they were able to make it to Championship Sunday. And then there's Hook, obviously, which I think it might be even bigger because some people think he might be the best player in the CDL at certain points. So for him not even be in the top 10, and then I'll just run real quickly through the top 10. Number 1, Simp. Number 2, Mercules. 3, Joe Deceives. 4, Abuza. 5, Scrap. 6, Shotzzy. 7, Ringcore. 8, Ghosty. 9, Dashy. And 10, Neptune. What do you think? Is there anything that really jumps out to you in terms of either the top 10 or the honorable mentions here?
Yeah, I was pretty vocal during the Major 2 qualifiers in particular that I said it that I thought, Mercules has been the best player on OpTic this year as a whole, but in the Major 2 online qualifiers in particular, Hook was playing like the MVP. And I know Temp has been vocal about that. And I said, like, if there was, like, specifically an MVP for just the online portion of the qualifiers for Major 2, I think it would have had to have been Hook. Um, excuse me. I think I definitely, like, I mean, I've also been pretty vocal about how impressed I've been by Kips in his, short stint since joining the CDL. I don't think I would have Kips in the top 10 quite yet, though. It is interesting. Hydra's on the outside looking in, though, just given his historical success and who Hydra is. I definitely agree that this year he hasn't had his strongest start to the season individually and like team success wise, but I don't remember when I would have brought this up, but I've definitely mentioned it in previous episodes before. Is it seems like uh Hydra is a player who just gets better as the game goes on, and it might just take him a little longer to hit that quote unquote final form or his best form than some of these other players who instantly fry at the start of the season. Um, in terms of the top 10 list from Nameless, I think the only I think you can argue about the positions of all the players on that list. I think the only one that jumps out is Rancor to me. Obviously, he's really good, but Miami just hasn't had the success on land, and I probably would use that against him in a list like this. But it's also, you know, what are we doing top 10 based on? Is it just like top 10 who we think is going to go out there and drop a 40 bomb? Is it like, what are we looking at in terms of the criteria for this list? And, if Rancor fits that bill, then you have every right to include him on your list. But I think the only interesting omission from this list and honorable mentions in total is 04, just given the fact he was the Major 2 MVP and was, so like we always talk about like the for rookie of the year and end of season awards and stuff, like how much that weighs into what we're thinking in terms of voting and stuff like that, whether a player like that's usually used as a tiebreaker when we look at, okay, if multiple players had the same number of championships, was one of them an MVP of an event or not, and that sort of thing. So I think I know 04 has been a pretty polarizing player this year in terms of like going from being in discussions from the community to potentially be considered for being dropped to being the event MVP. So I get it for why he wouldn't be on the list, but um just there's 13 players on this list counting the honorable mentions. I maybe at least give him an honorable mention just because he's um got that championship and the MVP. But yeah, I think that's the end of the day, it's a pretty straightforward list outside of that, in my opinion. I mean, you got guys on most of the top teams. I think, I mean, you could probably even argue that like Scrap shouldn't be in the top five just based on how LAT have played as a team. Like obviously Scrap is Scrap and he's
Mm-hmm.
gross, but again, that just comes down to what exactly you're looking at and formulating this list.
Yeah, I think that Scrap and Hydra are in a weird position because it doesn't seem that they have been as good as they have been and as good as we have seen them been. So that always kind of knocks them down, right? Because you know what their peak actually looks like, and you think like they're the best player in the world when they're at their peak, but when they're not, how far down the list do they kind of drop? Even though they have been, if you compare them to every other CDL player, I think it's undeniable that they're in the top. The top 13 is more than 25% of the league, at least in terms of current starters. So, like, if you said, like, is Hydra and Scrap, are they in the top 25% of the CDL players? Everybody be like, of course. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that they're, not in the bottom 75%. But where you put them, I think, is pretty interesting. Ringcore is also another interesting one because he actually has the highest KD in the CDL this season at a 1.15. Do you know who has the second highest KD?
Nope.
It's Super. So,
I was gonna.
like, that's crazy. Like, I think that kind of plays into, like, should Super also be, like, obviously we talk about it, like, KD isn't everything, but it's pretty obvious that they haven't dropped down, or if anything, they've gotten better from last year. It's just that the Heretics as a team have gotten much worse than they were last year.
I was gonna like I didn't bring it up in when I was just talking, but I feel like they're multiple times, especially during the Major 2 qualifiers, which is sticking out the most to me because that's when we were talking about Miami and potentially them, coming into form and being a more than a middle of the pack team. It felt like for a lot of those matches, I was always talking about Super and Trakes, and that's what I was going to say was that for a Miami player, I would maybe go Super over Rencor, but I also I didn't look at the KD numbers and stuff like that. So I mean that does make sense. There has been plenty of discussion over the last year plus on Rencor and Super's play styles and people calling them kill whores and like playing super slow, yada yada. Like there's been a lot of discourse around that I've seen. Um so it's not necessarily surprising to me that they're top for the KDs, but it is surprising given the lack of success that Miami have had on land this year. That that maybe the online matches are just super carrying them for
Mm-hmm.
from a statistical standpoint, but definitely would not have expected them to be 1-2 in KDs given obviously some of the other names on this list. Like Simp had the highest KD in the Major 1 qualifiers I
Mm-hmm.
know. So obviously, FaZe did struggle during the Major 2 qualifiers, probably took a dip there, but yeah, it is pretty crazy.
And it's also not surprising, even with those numbers, that they're not both in the top 10 or not both in the at least the honorable mentions because the team isn't very good. Like they're not even a top 5 team in the league. And I think that's really what this list comes down to. It's basically how we set up our all-star teams at the end of the year where this obviously we don't get 10, we get 8, but at the same point like we it feels weird to put like all 4 FaZe guys, all 4 OpTic guys, or like how many LAT guys versus FaZe and OpTic, and like how many Toronto guys. Like is obviously Joe would be in there, but is Kleenex in there? And like he's obviously not on this list, and he's had like a weird year because he's playing out of his role and all that. But like I think that's what it comes down to a lot is like in this list, we have 3 OpTic players in the top 10, 4 including the honorable mention. We have 1 LAT player, 2 if you include the honorable mention. And then you have 2 Paris Genomates players. You have 2 FaZe players. And then it's just like, and then you have like the odd men out, right? You have like Toronto, you have 2 if you include the honorable mention. And then you have Miami. It's just like, it's an odd list. If you're like, I think if you're not really thinking about it, but I don't like you can always argue about the order. I think the order is always the thing that's gonna screw people up because you could say like how is Rincourt above Ghosty when Ghosty was like he's won a major championship this year. Like it does feel like you can always kind of ding a team because of like recent performances, but also you put Rincourt above Ghosty and Neptune, even though Rincourt's team has not done anything on land. Or you could say the same thing about like Rincourt over Dashy or Ghosty over Dashy. It's like recently Dashy's probably been better than some of these players. So it's there's always going to be arguments. I don't when we do our all-star teams at the end of the year, I don't tend to do the like ranking them in terms of like 1 through 8. It's a lot easier when you break it down like SMG and AR player because then you can just say I think that these are the 2 best SMGs. What order 1, 2, it doesn't really matter, and I think that these are the second best. Are they 3, 4? It doesn't really matter. So, yeah, what were we gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I guess we can look at it that way in terms of, if the season ended today based on Nameless's list, in theory at least, his all-star team would be Simp and Joe as the first 2 SMGs, Mercules and Abuzas. The 1 through 4 there is technically, if you're counting Merc as an AR, that's your top 2 ARs are Merc and Abuza, and then Joe and Simp for uh the All Star SMGs. I think there would be some people who would not have seen that coming. And again, that's obviously speculative, and obviously Scrap coming off being an MVP and stuff, he probably works his way into that conversation too. But like that, I think that is interesting to look at, and even for the second team, like then it's Shotzi and Neptune and Scrap and Rencor is I guess that's not the craziest thing.
I mean, we did that before with obviously we had Neptune on our All-Star team, even though he didn't have a full season under his belt, but we felt like he did more than enough to get on those. I think we put him on the second All-Star team, if I'm not mistaken. And then who was it? I think it was Attach one year. We said like he was really good statistically, but when he was on Minnesota, the team wasn't very good, and I think he ended up getting on an all-star team as well. So it is a precedent that has been set that even players on bad teams or like underperforming teams can get awards and all-star recognition and all of that. So it wouldn't be crazy, but it does feel weird to have if this were to be the end of the season, Rincourt, like you said, would be a second team all-star, and then that would leave out like Ghosty and Dashy and who we think are some of the best players, some of the best ARs in the league, but they would be left off that list. Of course, we're only in April, so we have like 2 or 3 months to kind of figure this out. And if Miami continues to underperform, I think it's going to be a really hard case to make for Rincourt just from that point of view. Like they never really did anything. They never really were competitive or a contender at any point in the season. That's just a really difficult place to be in, to kind of argue as like this is a top 8 player in the league. That's pretty tough in all seriousness. Did you want to talk about the flank? I don't know if we actually touched on this too much.
No, it was just I thought it was pretty funny that their whole back and forth a little bit was Nameless saying this is based on the tweet. So I'm not listening to the clip right now because I got too much audio in my headset as is. But paraphrasing, Nameless essentially said one of Hook's strong suits is his communication, which I totally agree with. And he mentioned Rincourt doesn't even speak English, so we don't even know if he's actually good or not at comms, which I think that's kind of funny to just it's definitely true. Obviously I listen to a Miami listen in, and I can understand a couple of vamoses and directional stuff and some few phrases here and there, but I definitely we would have to get somebody who's fluent in English and Spanish to listen to Hook and Rincourt's comms to compare them. But I definitely think that was one of the funnier things. I think at the end of the day, this goes back to even when we were doing power ranking articles all those years ago and stuff. You're never gonna please everybody, and somebody's always gonna be pissed about something, and it just happens to be, in this case, Hook is the guy that people think should be ranked higher, and I think he should. Again, I think I didn't know the stat side for Rincourt, but it makes sense, and especially if he's number 1 in KD, kind of would be crazy to leave him off this list entirely. But at the same time, just Miami's performance on LAN, it's a question of whether you're weighing the individual KD more than the LAN stuff, and it is what it is at the end of the day. It's really just a fun exercise that, in some instances, not saying that it's happening in this case, but in a lot of cases, whether it's power rankings for NFL, MLB, and stuff like that, there are always people in the comments and replies who just get irrationally mad about something that's just people throwing their opinion out there.
Yeah, and that's why media outlets make lists in the first place, is to rage bait or you promote discussion or go viral based on people saying how is Hook not, if he had Hook at 7, basically just replace Rincourt with Hook in this list, there's no real debate. I'm sure somebody would find something, but the majority of the debate is coming from mostly OpTic fans, I'm assuming, because they have a vested interest in seeing Hook praised, and rightfully so, for his play. But they look to him and basically are how is he not in? And that's where a lot of this discussion is coming from. And I think that this list has blown up more because of that. So it does, unfortunately, incentivize people to do more of this. So the next time that Nameless does a top 10 list, not saying that he necessarily would do this, but he does have the incentive to basically leave out Dashy or Hook or Shotzi and put them outside, of the top 10. So I will say that and just make sure that people know that for when they read any top 10 list, I should say, whether it's in esports or traditional sports. Let's go to the minor. We have the first minor of the CDL season, the first of two. We will have another one during the Major 4 qualifier period. So that'll be pretty interesting. But this one, we were looking before the show. They didn't put out any rules. They didn't put out any like details about this minor really. So we're going off the assumption. I believe the community is too. That we're going off the assumption that the minor is completely unchanged from last year's minors, and that it is a single elimination tournament where the top 4 teams will receive CDL points and only the winner will receive money. Currently, it was or last year it was $20,000 going to the champion, and then it was 30 points, I believe, for the winner, 20 points for second place, and then 10 points for both the third and fourth place teams, or tied for third place teams. So we're going off the assumption of that. The minor bracket is based off of the standings of the post Major 2 overall standings. So the last week's matches in the Major 3 qualifiers, those don't factor in at all in terms of the seeding. So the number 1 seed is OpTic, and then you have FaZe Vegas at 2, Paris at 3, and LA Thieves at 4. I think most people would consider those to be the top 4 teams, or 4 of the top 5 teams at the very least. But those 4 teams get a first round bye in the minor. And then you have the bottom 8 teams. They would play in the first round. So Toronto will play Carolina. G2 Minnesota plays Cloud9. Riyadh Falcons play Vancouver Surge. And Miami Heretics play the Boston Breach. I don't know where you want to start. Is there a particular match in that first round that you think is interesting, or that you think is a little more contentious than the rest?
I just think to start, I think reminding people sort of what happened last year in these minors. Obviously, they were early in the season, so it's a little different, but it is worth mentioning how like these minor tournaments did have at least like some impact on the season in terms of seemingly being away for you know, without beating around the bush. FaZe struggled at the start of last year. Then there was the holiday break, and they come into the first minor tournament and they win that minor tournament. And they eventually go on to win Majors 1 and Majors 2 last year, so that was a big turning point for them. And then at Minor 2, it was actually LA Thieves who won, but it was Vancouver who started their trend, which I didn't, all these times of talking about seconds. Obviously, it's a minor tournament versus the majors and champs and that, but this was really the start of the Neptune era for Vancouver Surge and the beginning of them getting second place finishes. So, Vancouver started in round 1 of minor 2 last year and made it to the finals. And Carolina started in the quarterfinals last year because Carolina was really good early on. But no, FaZe started in round 1 and won the whole thing. So so far through 2 minors, we have seen a team from round 1 make it to the finals, and in one case a team from round 1 has won the whole thing. So big long way of saying that, like, obviously the seeding and the breakdown here might not matter as much because this is a single elimination tournament, and as we've alluded to multiple times in recent years with Call of Duty, it's really in recent years become a game where anybody can win on any given day. Maybe not anybody if you look at a team like Cloud9, but most teams can win against most other teams on any given day. And I think that's what makes these minor tournaments a little more exciting. And I think that's what I am hoping to see from this minor is what the community reaction and the sentiment around the bracket style play is, because as we've talked about as well, There was that whole like Valorant, everything is a tournament news update a couple weeks ago or whenever that was at this point. And we were talking about potential format changes and stuff. The success or lack thereof for the minor tournaments at the end of this season of the CDL could impact some decisions format wise for next year and beyond. So I think from a very basic, wide viewpoint of the league as a whole, this tournament, you know, is bigger than some people might think that just like a $20,000 winner take all single elim tournament would be.
Yeah, and if you win 30 CDL points in a weekend, that is more than you could win in any other weekend because you would only get 20 if you went 2-0. So it is and then on top of that, you still have the major 3 qualifiers, and like you said, like you can carry in some of that momentum from this tournament into your qualifiers. And I think that's why we should start with the Carolina versus Toronto, because you said like there have been teams that have actually made it from the first round into the grand finals, and I think that the only team that really comes to mind, at least in this tournament, that can really do that is Toronto. Obviously, they're in this place where they have to start from the first round because they've just been like a pretty lackluster team for most of this season. But obviously, very recently, they've seemed to turn a corner. Maybe they just got the England buff from Insight, but they seem to be like the one team out of that first round that could make a run. They play Carolina first round. Carolina has not been good. They didn't look particularly good after their roster change in the first week of the major 3 qualifiers. Obviously, I will go with Toronto in this prediction. How do you feel like this matchup goes, and how confident do you think that, or are you that Koi could actually make a run to the finals this weekend?
I think I do agree with you that Toronto is the best team in the first round. I'm so out on G2. I just don't trust them. Um I think you could maybe argue Miami, but like we were just talking about with the Rancor and the top 10 list thing, they've been strong online, but obviously this is an online tournament, so that could play in their favor.
Sure.
Um so I'd say if you don't think Toronto is the best team out of the 8 in round 1, they are at worst the second best team. I think that's very fair to say.
Yeah.
Um I just think it is going to be very difficult for them to get past OpTic. Like if Toronto was in any of these other 3 first round matchups and got to play any of the other teams, I would look at that like Toronto versus LAT, Toronto versus FaZe, even though FaZe just won the event, and then definitely Toronto versus Gentlemates. I would be really excited for those matchups just because it would be good to get another test of what Toronto can do and how they can hang against those teams, and seeing Insight try to uh, perform online after, like you mentioned, the England buff and whatnot. I just think it's a tough task for any of these teams to try and beat OpTic in the first round teams in particular. So I think that's a bit of an unlucky situation for Toronto, but obviously it's based on the seeding, so that's just the way the cookie crumbles there. But yeah, I definitely think Toronto beats Carolina. I would probably argue that Miami has the best chance to go on a run of the first round teams, and that is again based on how Miami have played online. Plus, if they get past Boston, they play Gentlemates. Gentlemates have recently had their struggles in the online qualifiers for Major 2. So that could be a little bit of a perfect storm if Miami comes in and plays on fire on a day where Gentlemates are lacking a little bit in the online matches. Like that could work out in Miami's favor. But outside of that, I mean it is weird considering G2 is the 5 seed. I do not have faith in them, and I am super out on predicting them, which means they'll probably win this whole thing.
Yeah, I think if this was a month and a half ago, I would feel really good about G2 as a dark horse because They would have to play Cloud9, which I think that they're going to win that match regardless.
Yeah.
Then they'd play LAT, who have been very up and down. Like, they have not reached nearly the level that you would think that roster could reach. So I think that's a very winnable match. Even now, I still think that's very winnable for G2. And then even if they were to play OpTic in the semifinals, we've seen like in the season that I think OpTic and G2 have went to 2 different game 5s, and I think OpTic's won both of them. But even then, like, you have some faith that G2 could pull off an upset. If you're able to force a game 5 against OpTic, then you probably are able to actually win a game 5 at least once in a while. So that's why I would think, like, you know, maybe in March, like early March, maybe late February, I could be talked into a G2 actually winning this tournament, as obviously they're not one of the favorites, but like outside of that top 4, I definitely think that they'd have a good chance. Now that we're in almost late April, I don't see that happening at all. They have been very, very disappointing. We've been talking about, like, are they going to make a roster change? And I think that, you know, we're going to come out of this weekend probably and continue to have the same conversation about them. You know, it would be stunning, like absolutely like cataclysmic if they lost to C9 in the first round.
Well,
like that's kind of the end, you know, like there's no other way to put it. Like it's over at that point. But, you know, what I think will happen is they'll beat C9 and they'll probably look pretty good. And then they'll lose to LAT probably in like a game 5. And we're going to be like, yeah, that's exactly what I expect out of Minnesota.
I would even go as far as to say even if they beat Cloud9 and don't look strong in doing so, that they have to consider making some roster change. And I know we've talked about it multiple times this year now, and Skies is seemingly the name that's been floated around the most, but at this point I don't even really personally care who the player is that goes. They need to do something to try and switch things up, especially because when you look at this bracket, they are in 5th place before this last week of qualifiers. So I don't think even if it changed a little bit, they're still in a position to be potentially one of the, you know, not one of the top seeds, but they're not like a team that's just sneaking into champs if the season ended today. So the fact we're looking at this bracket and it's like this team is the 5th seed, technically supposed to be the 5th best team in the league, and we aren't even like considering that to be a possibility, that should speak volumes enough to the state of G2 from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I don't really think, like, because Falcons are in such disarray that, like, they're not really in danger of falling out of the top 6 for a bit. Like Miami hasn't proven to be as consistent. Like, I think G2 actually has shown like a higher ceiling than a lot of these teams. They just have been less consistent than a lot of them. Like, Miami has been very inconsistent. Falcons have been very inconsistent. But G2, that's why they're in the 5th spot, is like they've been able to win some tough matches. They've won, at least until this past week, which was probably the most worrying week that they've had all year. They had been able to beat most of the bottom tier teams and kind of farm points, for lack of a better term, against them. And now, like, they're just in a completely different position where I just don't have any confidence in them to, you know, yeah, they could probably beat LAT, but that says more about LAT than it does G2, in my opinion. Like, LAT has been just kind of like floating through the year. They haven't done anything special at all this season. So yeah, I do think that Minnesota could win that second round matchup, but I don't think that G2 really has a great shot at winning it. Granted, like you said, that'll mean that they win it, but like, to me, if you tell me on Monday, hey, G2 won, I'd be like, holy shit, like, that's crazy. Like, that's an actual crazy minor winner in a time where we've actually had some pretty odd minor winners. Like, that first FaZe minor was like, yeah, like, that didn't really make a lot of sense considering what we had seen from FaZe to that point in the year. So if it's something like that, I guess, like, I could come around to it. But I had definitely had a lot more faith in FaZe to turn around their fortunes back then than I do this current G2 Minnesota roster. That being said, I think we're both in agreement that we're going to go with Toronto in that first round match against Carolina and G2 in their first round match against C9. And then you get like the pretty interesting matches. Like Vancouver just went 2-0 in the major 3 qualifiers to start. Red Falcons went 0-2. I don't know if you saw that, or maybe 0-1. Was it? I think it might have been just 0-1, but I don't know if you saw that clip where Kismet is like yelling and then Exnid yells at him after they lost. I mean, I don't read too much into that anyway, but I just think it's interesting. Like the frustration has to be pretty palpable in that camp. Yeah. Like even after this role swap, we just had like a potential roster mania period that just came and went without them actually making a change. And like they're in 7th place. This is way too talented of a roster to be in 7th place in this iteration of the CDL. Like to be behind G2 Minnesota, a really lackluster Miami, to just be kind of holding off Toronto, who had lost like multiple matches in a row early in the season and had to make roster changes. Like that's kind of ridiculous for the Falcons, considering they signed Salam, they have Pred, they got Kismet, who's a former world champion, a former champs MVP. Like they should not be in this position. And yeah, I think they're at real risk of being upset this weekend by Vancouver. How do you see this matchup between number 7 Falcons and number 10 Surge?
Yeah, I'm going with Vancouver for this one. And I think on paper, it's a match Falcons should win. And we kind of outlined it. I think this doesn't count. I think they play again, yeah, so they play next Saturday as well, Vancouver versus Falcons. So they'll play each other 2 times in a 2-week span, and obviously one of them is for 10 CDL points, and one of them technically is for 0 if neither team makes it to top 4. But that I mean that's a rough, like, that's not the right word I'm looking for. That's just an interesting situation in terms of how it could impact the series. Like, if one team gets absolutely 3-0 slammed in this minor matchup here, how does that impact the vetoes for the CDL, like the major 3 qualifier matchup? Does the one team that got stomped completely switch up what it was doing in the vetoes previously and try to throw other maps at the team and whatnot? So this is an interesting one. I'm going with Vancouver, just like I was kind of outlining last week. I think especially Gwyn with the NPC just looked like more like the Gwyn Rookie of the Year status that we saw from him when he was frying and playing on a team that he was popping off and nobody was really helping him. But in this case, it was TJ was playing pretty well. Lunar's had his moments as well, and even Nero. Like Nero, the consistency has been a question throughout his career, but obviously he showed up at certain points this past weekend in his debut for Vancouver. So yeah, in terms of the reaction clip thing you mentioned for Falcons, I couldn't really read too much into it unless there was a clip angle I didn't see or whatever. Like you could see the body language, but you couldn't just see their faces or try to read lips or anything like that. So it was a little weird. That I think some people were overreacting to it. Obviously, you can try and piece together what you think happened, but if you're just looking at the bottom half of somebody's body, it's going to be really hard to get a good read for exactly what's being said. But I do think in a much broader sense that just illustrates exactly what is going on in that camp and the concerns that the community has had in terms of the roster mania period, like you mentioned. And I think it's just a concerning time for the Falcons team, because it feels like, especially if you're playing Vancouver twice, Vancouver haven't been good this year. They make a roster change that potentially is allowing them to have a little bit of a mid-season honeymoon, or they're actually just way better than they were before. You can, I'm not going to say that after 2 matches, but it's at least something you can contemplate. You got to play them twice now, and if Falcons lose both of these matches to Vancouver coming up, I think that's a very scary situation for them to be in, and I think they would have to once again consider a roster change.
To correct myself, they Falcons did play twice last week. They lost both to Toronto and to FaZe Vegas. Obviously, two much better teams than Vancouver is. But we can't forget, though, that the Falcons beat OpTic in the Major 2 qualifiers and then immediately lost to the Vancouver Surge the next day. And this was obviously before their roster change. And Vancouver, has been one of the worst teams the entire season. Whether that's changed, I guess we'll have to see. But yeah, they're like the Falcons are in a really bad way. They have lost 5 consecutive matches, starting with that Vancouver loss. Then they lost to Minnesota, Toronto twice in a row, and then FaZe Vegas. I'll go with Falcons because I have no faith in Vancouver that like what we saw last week is indicative of like actual a major change. I just think like they played 2 teams that are susceptible to losing to bottom tier teams in general. And the Falcons are one of those teams as well. But I think when it comes down to it, I always kind of lean on the talent. And there's like obviously like so much more talent on this Falcons team than there is on the Surge roster. So I'll go with the Falcons, but holy shit, like this could be really bad. This could be like 6 losses in a row. You would not feel very good that they're not going to be able to avoid 7 losses in a row. Like when you said, when they play Vancouver again, like that's a horrible position to be in, especially on the heels of like, a period in which you actually could have made a change. You could have maybe kickstarted this roster or like just did something to kind of switch it up in the same way that we were talking about Minnesota. Like it does feel like this is the point of the season for a lot of these teams that aren't nearly where they think they should be, where the rosters or the coaches or maybe even the ownership or the front office is saying like, hey, like let's pick it up. Like we only have a few months left in the season. Let's get the ball rolling a little bit. Let's see what we have before we get down to the very end of the regular season. And we're just hoping and praying that we can get into champs. So it's going to be I think it's probably the most intriguing matchup of the first round because these 2 teams are just at a very odd point in their respective journeys. And if the Falcons lose, it makes it all that more intriguing, in my opinion. And then we have Miami versus Boston. I have absolutely no faith in Boston. I have very little faith in Miami, but relative to Boston, I have a ton of faith in them. So I will go with the Heretics. I don't have to think too much about this. This Breach team, if Purge was as bad, if he's as bad this weekend as he was last weekend, they have absolutely no shot at winning like any match for the rest of the season. It's going to be like really, really difficult. And, I don't like to beat up on him. Like I've been a big advocate for like him being in the CDL. And I think like for a long time, like he actually did make his teams better in a way that just didn't show up like in the stat sheet. But at the end of the day, you do have to get some kills. You do have to contribute in the slaying department in some way. And if he's not able to do that, then it's going to be a really long, hard road for Boston. And I'll go with Miami as a result.
Yeah, got to go with Miami here. I think that's pretty much what you were just alluding to with the last match. Vancouver Falcons is the only first round matchup here that I really think could end up going either way, depending on what version of Falcons shows up. I think Miami should take care of business against Boston. G2 definitely should take care of business against Cloud9. And if they don't, that's an entirely different conversation. And then Toronto versus Carolina, Toronto should handle that as well. So I think, at least from a Miami perspective, I would be shocked if they lost this match to Boston. But I think kind of what I was saying earlier, like then that would set Miami up as potentially the only team that I really give a true shot to pull off an upset in that second round against the top 4 seeds. I would be very shocked if we don't see 1 through 4 in the semifinals here. I was gonna say winners semis, but obviously it's only one bracket. But I think every other time we are looking at a tournament and say, oh, this bracket looks like it's going to be chalk, something crazy happens. And I definitely think something weird's going to happen at this minor tournament. I just can't pinpoint what it would be.
Yeah, and the single elimination is a big part of it too, because even if like in a normal tournament where you have like the winners round 1, it might look like it's chalk, but then even if it does end up being chalk, like the top 4 seeds end up winning their matches, then the losers bracket still offers like a ton of variety and a ton of upsets. And also like tournaments, like major tournaments are different because those teams like prepare like they're hard scrimming for the week or so before the tournament. Then they fly out there. So they're kind of like focused and like really amped up for that. I don't know if that's the case for the minor. I feel like it could just be kind of like showing up and just like, hey, like we're playing like an all online qualifier, but then you lose and you're like, all right, like I guess we're done for the weekend. And like, that's it. So it does, I don't know if it has like the same kind of build up for the players, and it could affect how different of results that we could see. But yeah, I do think that like there's a really clear like bottom 2 in the CDL currently with C9 in Boston. Like that's like so clear. And then there's a pretty clear like 9-10, which is Carolina and Vancouver, which way you want to go, like whether it's Vancouver at 9 or Carolina at 9 or whatever. But then I think like you had like the Falcons, G2, Toronto teams where it's like they are obviously not the bottom 4, but I don't know how far they go up into like the top 4, top 5, and like how far they are down toward like 7 or 8. So I mean, and that is kind of reflected in our power rankings that we just did, where it's like, yeah, like it does seem to be like a pretty clear delineation between like the very elite, which is like OpTic and FaZe, and then like the rest of the teams, honestly. Like you literally had like a line of demarcation because you didn't have anybody in the tier below like S tier, like the A tier was completely absent. And that shows like there's a pretty big gap between where these teams are. And I think we'll probably get to see that this weekend. Hopefully good matches. There's always good matches when we like just in every week. It's very rare that we just like go through it and it's like, yeah, there was nothing that happened here. There could be a lot of 3-0 DoorDashes. That's very possible, but some of those are very entertaining and instructive. Like if Vancouver 3-0 DoorDashes Falcons, like we're going to have a long conversation, I think, about the Falcons on the next episode. Or if C9, I mean, God forbid for G2, but if C9 were to somehow DoorDash G2, we'd have a long conversation. I'd have like, we'd have to throw a party though because C9 is like one or two respawns all year, so that would be a little bit weird. But we'll obviously talk about it. We're not going to make predictions for the second round, obviously, because we don't know who it's going to be. We can make predictions though, so I do want to get your thoughts on like who's actually going to win. We're coming off of a FaZe Vegas Major 2 championship. Obviously, Paris won the first major. These teams, even the top 4 teams, have looked odd at times. LAT, Paris especially, just really off at different points, especially when they go to the online qualifiers. Where are you leaning as far as a champion for the first minor of this season?
Whew. I really... I think there are multiple ways to look at it. I think I'll just go with OpTic. I think there are 2 likely scenarios for this minor tournament. Obviously, there is the situation where OpTic lose either first match or second match for them and they don't make the finals. I just think that's pretty unlikely unless they play LAT and LAT is just giga frying on that day. But assuming OpTic make it to the finals of this event, I think it would be really funny if they lost another finals appearance just because it would like there would be so many Green Walls fans who are freaking out and stuff, even though this is just an online minor tournament. But it would be their second place finish of the year, and that there would definitely be some funny memes and jokes that come out of that. But at the same time, it would also be kind of funny if OpTic win this minor, but then eventually down the road don't win Major 3 or continue to get their second place finishes and stuff. But like let's just say OpTic win Minor 3 and Minor 4, but they don't win Major 3 or Major 4, and then there are the jokes that could come out of that. I just think that's probably a weird way of looking at it, obviously, but I think that also lends into the like this isn't as serious as an actual major. Obviously, for the players, it's $5,000 for each of them. If 20,000 is split four ways, you don't know about the org cut and whatnot, but um, it's kind of like an elevated bounty match, and we've obviously had
Yeah.
plenty of discussions of those when that was a thing for a while. Um, so I think I hope it's OpTic versus FaZe in the finals, and we get another match between them. And I think OpTic is too good of a team to have the string of second place finishes continue. So I'll pick OpTic here, but um, I do think there are those two outcomes of either OpTic winning the minor and then having it not translate to the LAN events later in the year, or OpTic getting another second place finish. I think both of them have the potential to have some interesting narrative spawn.
I'd probably go with FaZe, just a little bit to be different, but also we just saw FaZe beat OpTic in the grand finals. Like, um, there are obviously reasons that you could go with either one of these teams. It is interesting, like you said, that OpTic, they've only lost in the grand finals on LAN, but this isn't LAN, and like you don't know how that'll change. Also, OpTic has been very good online recently. They of course went 10-1, I believe it was, in the Major 2 qualifiers. They started the Major 1 qualifiers off really well. We didn't get to see much of them this past weekend, and they played like literally the worst team in the league. So I don't know how much you can take it from there. But yeah, OpTic is, I expect it to be OpTic and FaZe in the grand finals. I think most people probably expect that to be the case. It would be interesting if it was Paris and OpTic, because that would obviously be a rematch of the Major 1 grand finals, and Paris has kind of been on like a downward spiral pretty much since then, and OpTic has been pretty, like, a lot more solid, a lot more consistent since then. It would be even more interesting if somehow OpTic or FaZe did not make it here, especially OpTic, like if LAT somehow beat them, which would be just astounding considering where they both are this season. But yeah, I just expect it fully to be OpTic versus FaZe in the finals on Sunday, and I'll go with FaZe for the win. I will probably change that prediction if they do make it, because like I get a little freaked out when we get to Sunday and you send me the pick'em and I'm like, I'm feeling OpTic, and then most of the time you're like, I'm feeling FaZe, and we kind of flip our picks. So I'll go with FaZe at this point in time. I don't know if they do MVPs. I don't think it really matters one way or the other. Mercury's probably MVP, or if FaZe wins, Simp. That seems to be the way things are going. Anything else before we get out of here? So Pick'em this year, you are still 98-54. I'm 99-53, and Trimmer is still winless. Again, this was one of our shorter shows. We're at like a minute 10, or a minute, almost a minute 10. So
minute 10?
Yeah, a minute, yeah, an hour 10. That one really be short. It would just be the intro, and then we're like doing the outro. We should do that like on April Fools next year. Just like, hey, all right, see ya. But yeah, make sure to subscribe, like, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. You can watch the live streams of the podcast either on YouTube or Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. You can follow us both on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcaster is at Ego Chall Podcast. And the next show should be on Sunday evening after the matches are done, and we'll break down the first minor. We'll give our thoughts on what just went on, and we'll get to see if the meta has actually changed. Obviously, we're only on Wednesday, and we're really just hearing rumors about like what's been going on in practice and how things might be changing. But I think we might get a pretty good look into how the meta has changed, if it has changed at all, by the end of Sunday, and we'll break it all down when we talk to you next. That about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Appreciate it. I don't really have much else to add, honestly. I think it'll be interesting to see, like I said, what the reaction is to the minor bracket and how it plays out and the format and all that stuff. So I am excited to see, like I outlined, see if this has any sort of impact on, whether the minor tournaments continue beyond the season or if there are even more of them going forward, yada yada. But that's obviously down the road. I'm just excited with it. It's, still online Call of Duty at the end of the day, but it is something a little different, so should give us something interesting to discuss next time. And yeah, end of the day, we got more matches coming up and should be a good weekend. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to breaking it all down for you guys on the next show, and we will see you then. Hope everyone has a good one, and remember to send the chow.